It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.
All right. We are recording. Back again for another podcast. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. With us, as usually, is Peter Lawrence, Chad Jutner.
Hey, and that's Otis in the background, if you can hear him. He's
Otis Jutner, the third. And Steve Bunda is back from the Boundary Waters and back on the podcast. Today we're going to talk about what do you do when things go horribly wrong, like in the moment. You know, we've talked about failure in the past and things like that. This is more of you're doing a presentation, you're doing a demo, and it glitches out on you. There's a number of things that can go wrong, and depending on the audience and the situation, some are worse than others. But I think we all have a story. Maybe not Chad.
Chad never has any problems.
Everything just goes his way. Unless it's an AI thing finishing overnight. No comment.
Even that kind of was a fun story to tell. And we learned a lot.
That's right there. Those are nuggets of wisdom. That's a way to look at something is important, because when you're in the moment, and what I found is you have that panic, especially when you're doing a tech demo, like when something doesn't go right and you have that.
I got to ask Steve. So Steve, you're joining us from more of a non-programmer aspect of things. Do you have the same just drop into the pit of your stomach when something goes wrong in a demo, even though you're not necessarily responsible for having coded it or anything like that?
You know, I haven't had anything go terribly wrong during a demo, but I think that's because I accounted for the potential, and I stole a line from a friend of mine when he was doing a demo. Because when something did go wrong, I said, well, like a cooking show, I've already prepped this ahead of time and taken screenshots, and so I brought that up as my backup. And by the way, you'd be surprised how well that line goes over, the cooking show line.
Cooking show. I'm saving that one.
People feel that that resonates with them. Like something's okay. We've already done this ahead of time. It's okay to show what has happened. So I've done that as a kind of a workaround. But I haven't.
It has a diffusion effect because it tells people that, hey, this is like a cooking show where we're doing something live, and bad things can happen, and they're used to that and okay with it because they've seen that actually happen. Lets the person doing the demo off the hook a little bit.
What about you, Peter? Have you had a demo go sideways? How did you handle that?
I have had so many demos go sideways that, you know, it's almost like, here we are, failing again. And like the most recent one was like right before we got together as a group for the demo. We put in some changes and kicked off the automatic build. And of course, the automatic deployment kicked off right in the middle of the demo. And so you just have to kind of tap dance for a little bit and say, oh yeah, this is because we're deploying fresh code right now that I didn't think about 10 minutes ago when I should have been thinking about not hitting the button, but I hit the button anyway. So that's been my latest flavor. But then everybody's like, okay, well, we'll do a little song and dance. We'll talk about what's going on, and then we'll show what once everything gets deployed out correctly. But yeah, there's been a lot. You know, database servers go down all the time. And it's just funny that we kind of gotten used to doing that in a demo. I feel like I have anyway. Like it's just like, oh yeah, it's 12:05. It's time for the dev database to back up, and it's going to take a few minutes, and then it'll spin. You know, everything will be back up to fast again. Just horrible things that we take for granted as developers. Like, oh yeah, that I forgot about that because it normally just affects me and I just move around it. But during a demo, it's a little bit more obvious.
The big event.
The big event is a fun one.
Being tech support for the big event and getting that. Can you come down to the basement, realizing
that's my favorite.
The recording failed, the camera's not working, that kind of stuff. And there's people in the room. That's the big issue, is you're being watched. Like, people can see it happening. Chad, I think you're good at this, is acknowledging it and then telling a quick story and moving on, taking the crowd with you. I had one where a while ago, something went wrong and I froze because it was a sales thing and I was demoing something to try to get some work. This is like 5 years ago. And at one point I had to type in my email address and I typed it in wrong. That was what made the workflow to do what they wanted us to do for them. And it was a demo to show that the functionality worked. And luckily, there was someone sitting beside me, and as I'm looking at it, not really knowing what to do because I'm stunned because I was expecting it just to work because I had tested it 100 times, and it was such a shock. They went, I think you typed your email in wrong. That fixed it, but I didn't get the gig, so that didn't go well.
But
that's just
one
that's example.
That moment of just abject horror when something doesn't work. It takes you out of the moment, right? I've practiced this. I've done this exact same move over and over. I've put one foot in front of the other, and all of a sudden I'm face down looking up at this, or looking down at the sidewalk because I tripped over something that wasn't there.
I don't really experience that panic as much, but I think that's more a case of like doing so many demos and so many presentations and having just a comfort level with that entire experience, right? Like public speaking is in and of itself, scary for some folks, and then failing in public is even scarier. So, I just build in the capacity to make fun of myself. My AI demo last February, right? Not necessarily, it didn't get the output that I wanted from the demo itself, but we told a really cool story. And I don't know, Steve, did you see the demo that I did? Maybe at big event last year. I've heard different things from different folks depending on how close they were to me. But once I realized ahead of time that the model didn't really compile overnight in the way that I wanted it to, and I wasn't able to get the output that I wanted to. But a couple of the folks on the project with me made a comment about the story that I told at the end of that demo, right? Knowing full well that I wasn't going to get the image that I was hoping for. One of them was like, I thought I was seeing like actual emotion from you for the first time ever, right? Like I was telling this really emotional story about my grandpa. And he's like, you don't realize, like I was sitting next to a couple other people and those women were like getting emotional with you. And then I show a picture of a capybara. In
world's largest rodent.
Yes, in a Navy outfit. And that was fun. Maybe not for everybody, but I had a blast with it. And then not really being able to look up from my screen and see other people's reactions. Like I really, really enjoyed that.
Okay, I'll tell you, because I was there, I saw it. And that story going into it, sharing that history, the military history of your family and service and all that, it was an emotional story. And then not having any closure on that. Like I wanted to see the results of that story happen. And then it was like, okay, that was it. It was disappointing because the buildup was there and people were engaged and you had them right there. Yeah.
I am known for not providing payoff with a lot of my stories. This is on brand.
Not knowing your audience got me in really not hot water, but it ruffled feathers. And it's bad when there's a meeting that happens, a hurry up meeting that happens right after.
The old follow up meeting that we need you to attend,
and you're not invited. Only your management is. But I didn't know the audience, and the way it was set up to me was it was a technical presentation. Went down that path, and it was decent. It was, showing our work, what we did and how it worked and behind the scenes and all that stuff. And the person was just a business user, was a stakeholder. I think it made her feel bad because she kind of glazed over and didn't know what was happening. So she got a technical presentation and she wasn't technical, didn't have any idea the tool we were using, what were you doing, any of that stuff. I think what they wanted to show was, here's how this is going to help us. They wanted the story of it.
So you gave the behind the scenes, this is the technical ways that this magic trick works. And here's all the gears that spin and everything. All they wanted to see was the coin disappear, not to know, well, I palmed the coin, I put it in this hand, I took it over here, I laid it on the table, then I put the cup over it. And having that description is like, I don't really care how I wanted to be caught up in the magic of the moment, not not the details, right?
I went up to do stand-up, and instead of telling the joke, I just explained it.
Yes.
Yeah. So that didn't go well, but we recovered from it. But, I feel a lot of pressure. I always want to do well in those types of things. And so when I could feel like I was losing the audience, and we kind of ended.
You gave them their time back.
I did, yeah, because I am the giver of time. I am Chronos, god of time.
That is one of the worst phrases. That's up there with circle back, put a pin in it, and all the other silly things we say in meetings.
Sorry, I didn't mean to poke you, Chad. But
No, that's okay. I mean, when we code switch from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and speak this different language, I've got an entire rant or manifesto, if you will, coming based on this. But
based on having time returned to you?
Well, no, just based on the way we talk at work. And that's why I get keyed up sometimes because anyway, that is an entirely different podcast and an entirely different thing. I just think it's
so
silly.
Kyle, you mentioned sort of the size of the audience in relative to like doing things under pressure with the big event and stuff like that. The size of the audience probably plays a big role in how far south something can go, right?
Sometimes, but sometimes it's almost like, well, there's so many people, I don't have to really worry about any, specific person getting mad at me. They're all mad at me, so it doesn't matter. The deed is done. I had, I was giving a presentation at SharePoint Saturday one year, and I like to record my presentations. And so I had my camera set up on a tripod, and Ben Story was sitting next to it. And he kicked it over halfway through. And I had to go stop what I was doing, go get it set up, go back. But then it gave me a lot of material, kind of cheered up the crowd, brought everybody back. I made fun of Ben, which is always fun for everybody.
Absolutely.
But that kind of stuff, that's easy to recover from. When something goes bad and there is no recovering, like it's just not going to work. And I think that's the worst.
Hey, so Steve, talk about your experience with this. I mean, you're in slightly different role, but not that different, right? Like you still do all of our, agile ceremonies and everything else. And when those don't go well, like I actually kind of feel this because you have to probably perform a little more than the rest of us, right? Like you've got to own a lot of this. And when those go south, like does it happen for you, first of all, like maybe a valid question. And does it happen for you at this point in your career? And does it still, I remember early on in my career, this stuff stung a lot more. Now it doesn't really, like any kind of, failure or bad demo or whatever, like, oh, well, it was a bad demo. Move on, right?
So are you thinking like sprint reviews where you're demoing what the team accomplished in the last 2 weeks or whatever? I haven't had too many things go sideways there. One time the person who was giving the demo was having a minor medical issue during the demo, and it was going off the rails. And I just kind of stepped in and said, "Oh, here, let me demo that on your behalf," and kind of took over, and I kind of winged it. Now, fortunately, I knew the material well, which I think a key to overcoming any obstacle during a demo that goes wrong is if you know the material well.
Right.
I've had some talks where I was speaking on behalf of Microsoft. This was years ago, and I didn't know the material that well. It was so new, and something went wrong, and I had to, went through the phases of panic and paralyzation, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to handle this? Those are probably worse when I don't know the material. But if you know it, you can always get past it. You can always speak to it and give a description of it as long as you know it. And I've had that happen before at SDG where I forgot. Somehow I misplaced the materials I was going to go through on my laptop, and I had to just do it verbally from memory. It was okay. I think it went fine. But yeah, it does happen.
A little easier to have the crutch of having the materials, though, at least, right?
Yes, yeah.
And maybe don't sign up for something that's a great point, because I used to have this experience early in my career as a consultant. I was working for a company that was basically, we went into customers on IBM paper, right? So we'd provide consulting around IBM's like WebSphere and WebSphere Portal, all these products that IBM has. And if you don't really, really know that stuff, pull out quick, right? Like, but back then, I mean, it was a different time. It was like, hey, we're going to hand you a red book and a plane ticket. You can read about it on your way down there. Good luck. Have fun at, I can't name the client. They're still around, but it was a thing. But that's when I referred early in my career, like those were the kind of like the pit of your stomach, like the cold sweat panic. I'm in a room and 10 people are looking at me to be able to speak eloquently on how to properly scale, 100 nodes. That's a different beast. Whereas today, I'm, after quarter century of experience, I'd be fine. Right. And it's a different thing, too, when you're representing peers in a company that you have a lot of respect for. Right. Like this, I would never try to wing it, or I don't even know what the right word is, fake it if I was representing SDG. Right. Like I like SDG. I like our coworkers. I like our company. And
you're older and know that winging it doesn't necessarily help.
Yeah. I mean, personality and good looks will only take you so far in
Have either of you, any of you, experienced the conundrum of the group project presentation? And by that, I mean you're presenting with another person. And that person either like goes off script, does something different than what you agreed upon prior, maybe says some of the material you were going to cover. Have you ever had that happen?
Or had a question come up that is yours to answer that they field and they don't do it justice. I don't like to share the stage. I really don't. I'd rather be up there by myself, failing on my own. But sometimes you have to do them. Like each have a part. Sometimes it's to save time. We're going to just, since this has to happen in a hurry, you do this one, I'll do this one. As bad a feeling when it's somebody else failing, but you still have that panic moment. You're still part of the presenters, but you also have more hands on deck to kind of get out of it.
I almost feel worse when I'm on a team project, like you're saying, Steve, and maybe a partner's flailing a little bit. And for me, it's an existential thing, right? Like I don't want to just automatically jump in, right? Because I don't want to make a peer look bad, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want the whatever to
the wrong answer to be shared,
right? So
right.
It's like,
what if it's incorrect information?
Exactly, right? Like I'm like crap, like I really do start, and this has been a thing I've had experience with over the last couple of years. Is like, I mean, my buddy's flailing. I don't want to jump in and make him look worse, or but I also don't want to present something that is categorically false. So like in my head, that's. If there is like a real struggle or a panic right now, it's me just trying to do all of that emotional math in my head really quick and come out with like on the fly, like, okay, where do you go with this, right? Like, do I jump in? Do I say something? Do I let it ride? That sucks. That's harder for me.
There's a flip side of that. You're in an audience being presented to something that's pretty important. A lot of people are there. They need to have the right information, the right idea, and the presenter says something that's just blatantly incorrect. That's going to give all of those people the wrong picture of what it's going to take or how it works or something like that. And do you speak up and correct them if you know the answer? And I would say
I've seen both sides to that coin. Someone who's an expert is going to help your presentation with a little bit of extra information.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Someone is going to take over your presentation and rehash what you've just hashed, which I've never seen that go. I've never really enjoyed watching someone from the audience present material that I just watched.
You have a mimic in the room that wants to talk and just says the same thing you're saying a different way, like I just did.
Right, like in a different way, but says the exact same thing. Right.
I call it translating English into English. No, I was in a situation where I didn't want to speak up, but it was kind of a major that had quite an impact about what this thing will integrate. Like, how well does the migration happen with this tool?
Oh, it works flawlessly every time.
And I've used the tool enough to know to stop using it. It was I think we need to look into that some more because I've had some bad experiences. So I'm not sure it is just going to be a fire and forget thing we can do. That was hard to do, and then I got chewed out afterwards she didn't like that very much that I spoke up.
Those are the challenges. Steve, how about you? You mentioned this as though you were recounting an experience or two.
I was, and I think if you recall the meme of the person's head with all the math figures around their head, you know that one? That's what I'm doing when I'm hearing like bad information being shared. I'm doing the math like, okay, what's the calculation of me interjecting here versus, against the damage that the bad information is going to be caused versus ruining my relationship with that person who's presenting. And sometimes I have to like calculate that and go, I'll do damage control later.
I can do back channel fixes for this later on.
Yes, exactly. Yep, I'll do some bug fixes. We'll do some patching. Everything will be fine. Let's release it to prod.
I do that same thing. I'm like, okay, the person talking right now, the person that's incorrect. Do I have beers with this person? Have I ever had beers with this person? Because if that's the case, I could probably fix what I'm about to say. If not, then keep quiet. And if it's, I am way more conscious these days about coming off as, well, I'm going to say it and it's going to sound funny, but like, I don't want to sound too cocky. And I don't want to mansplain anything ever. So like, if that's a thing I really want to be careful about. Like I don't want to make a colleague look silly. Now, if it's somebody from another consulting company, we'll go to, I'm kidding.
The war.
I don't do that either, but
no.
I am really conscious of like just the social math that goes into like what am I going to get out of this and what is the audience going to get out of this? You always have the option to just, right? And that's almost frequently a better thing to do than to throw your voice into something. I mean, you can always follow up later. So,
and along those lines, my first consulting company I worked at, they taught classes. So I didn't have anything to do. So I attended an admin class that this guy put on, one of my coworkers. There were some of the things he was talking about, I had a lot of experience in. And so he was, doing his thing, and I kept my mouth shut. And then on a break, I went up and I said, "Hey, you said this, but actually this works like that. Did you know that? Because I did a project." I kind of had a quick conversation with him, and I'm like, "Do you want me to like speak up or raise my hand or help?" And this guy was the most humble, grounded, nicest guy you'll ever meet, and he's like, "Please, that would be so cool." And so we kind of like co-presenting, and he would actually like engage me on certain things, and that really worked out. But what are the stakes? If the stakes are not super high, I'll keep my mouth shut and just let them do their thing. And then I might talk to them afterwards, but don't want to be as wrong, piping up and trying to be helpful.
Hopefully wrong.
How about this? How about your like getting questions after slide 1 about slide 10?
So somebody's sat on it for 9 slides.
You just start talking and someone has 50 questions about your entire presentation that just come out.
That's one of those. I think it's an easy thing to deflect, to say you're 10 steps ahead of me. We'll get to that. When we get to that slide, please chime in. That kind of thing. Congratulate them, make them feel good about jumping ahead, but also tell them, dial it back a little bit till we get through the presentation.
Whoa, slow down there, Tex.
Yes.
Yeah, nice. Do that. Emasculate them while you're at it.
Yeah. No, it's they're feeling bad. Usually when something bad happens in someone else's presentation, like they're feeling bad enough. They're in a bad enough spot. We've all been there. And if you can help, legitimately help, then yeah, absolutely. Sarcastic, basically all the things I did, 15, 20 years ago, when I make a joke and at someone else's expense. I've grown up since then a little bit. But yeah, you don't want to make them feel bad. If you can help, if you can save the day, great. But it's their thing, though. It's their show. Mm-hmm. So I always worry about like changing their experience. Like they're up there to do their thing. Let them do their thing. If something goes wrong and I know what it is and I can help fix it, like I look at my phone and there's no internet, I'm like, internet's out. Content wise, if I'm doing a presentation at a conference or something like that, and I get questions and I get derailed and stuff, I never really feel like I'm derailed. if the audience has taken the conversation in a different direction and changed the flow, but that question was there, and then I can get us back pretty quickly on track.
And that's a expertise thing. Like, you have enough expertise to answer that question and then bring everyone back to where you were, to the map and following the trail that you were on.
I always feel like if I need my slides at all, then I'm not qualified to do it. I should be able to just walk in and just give that presentation. Some things require prep, demos, things like that, if you're showing things off. But if it's just, knowledge transfer, early on, I was not committed every PowerPoint sin on one slide. I used every animation. What happens, you get like somebody that's negative in the room? Steve, it happened to you. Yeah, somebody piped up and derailed the whole thing. I think that was me. Well, I don't know. There was a lot going on there. And
yeah. I know what you're referring to. That was a legitimate interruption. It was a coachable moment, and you took the opportunity to coach, and that was totally fine.
Yeah. Apologies happened afterwards if I made them look bad at all or anything. There was a long conversation with that person after I begged forgiveness, and they gave it.
So you bring up an interesting point, Kyle, when you're an audience member, because if you look at it from the presenter, like, we've all been a presenter, it's generally additional work we're doing on top of our normal job, right? So we're putting in extra time, extra effort, trying to make this work. And if you've got a bunch of critics in the audience, that sort of deflates the motivation to do this sort of thing, right? So you're taking time to do this. If I'm an audience member, what can we do when a presentation goes sideways, when something goes off the rails? What would you like to see if from an audience member?
I will take a heart attack.
If you can really recognize it, start asking easy questions, right? Like, somebody's falling off the rails, a demo's, whatever the cause is, right? Lobbing softballs at a presenter to get them back on track and get them comfortable again is such an easy thing to do as an audience member, right? Like, not that it's necessarily our function to make a presenter feel more comfortable, but certainly, sometimes I'm just remembering back to when I was way younger, and the types of things that would have helped is exactly that, right? Like, sometimes I'm so far lost that a couple of little lobs would be super helpful. And we just talked last week. We had Natalie on, and she was talking about kind of like a more general topic. We were talking about, effective meetings, and some of the advice that she gave was really good for this too. She quoted Craig Ferguson, one of the best late night hosts and comedians we were ever given. And Craig Ferguson actually had just 3 things that he would say when it comes to when to speak up. And the first one was, does the thing I want to talk about need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? And does it need to be said by me right now? And that, I feel, is when we're talking about, as an audience member, do I really need to say it? Do I actually need to say it? No, do I actually need to say it right now? Is that going to help at all? At our stages in our careers now, we could actually probably recognize, especially with younger generations, somebody flailing through one of these things, and we could be a lot more helpful. We could be a lot more proactive by just pitching them easy, not like insulting, but like helping to reset something that's some sort of train wrecks, get it back on the tracks to whatever degree we can. That would be really cool. I would have appreciated that.
Something like, so on that last slide, you were talking about this. How does that pertain? And in your head how that pertains, et cetera, right?
Yeah. Hey, while you're fixing that, here's some easy questions that I know are in your wheelhouse that you can answer that might be legitimately helpful for this presentation. Like, if you can throw those things out there. I'll go up and throw one of those smoke bombs, and then I'll secret them out of the room.
That's the other way to deflect that a little bit. We talked about when the internet goes down, and I'm just still flabbergasted that anyone in this modern world expects the internet to be there all the time, especially during a presentation, because that's when it's known to shut down automatically. Like, the internet's down because we have more people in this room than we ever had before, or whatever.
That's a good point. It's a moment where you're gonna likely cause internet issues because 50 people in that room are connected to the same Wi-Fi.
Exactly. And you're trying to get enough for a presentation to go through this pipe that everybody else who maybe they're bored and you've lost them and they're
Screaming.
downloading bank information or whatever. But it's astounding that more people are not prepared, like you said, Steve, with some screenshots to kind of like, and here I've baked this pie that's all ready and looks beautiful, even though it doesn't look anything like the crust I put on it just a minute ago.
James Landreau did a presentation that was screenshots, and he did it so well, and he had some animations in there that I thought he was doing it live. And I complimented afterwards, and I worked really well. And he's like, yeah, I decided I would do it this way instead of doing it live. And I'm like, that wasn't live? Well, you fooled me, so it worked, whatever you were going for. So do you ever have a situation where the feedback after the presentation is the problem that you ran into? Like you didn't an example is I gave a presentation about 6 years ago on SharePoint governance and all of the things. And there's so much out there about that, and it's way overkill for the most part. So I like to, dial it back, try to make it efficient and not restrictive, and rules suck, and you don't want all that. So I, using my experience, I boil it down and give them a presentation. And then the first response at the end was, I could have read that on the internet. Said you could have, among 6,000 other things related to it that were not correct or not a good idea.
Is your question, how does one respond to that?
Like, yeah, how would you respond to that?
That's probably where I'd say, in a much nicer tone, I look forward to your next presentation on this topic. In a nicer way, like, hey, maybe you could help me do the next one.
Or I'll run the next one by you to make sure I'm not just regurgitating an article on the internet.
Right. Or, here was my objective. Do you feel that should have been different? It's, like I said earlier, it's easy to throw rocks from the cheap seats.
It is. And I kind of like that as a way to deflect someone we've all kind of done that. Like, would you like to drive? Or something on that nature to some folks that are getting a little bit too involved, and after the presentation, that would be very painful to have spent the time reading those articles and boiling it down.
I see this kind of playing out even in meetings where I've had it where my approach to something is different than someone else's approach, and we're both brought in to meet and talk about like what we're going to do, where we find ourselves in a disagreement. And that's where I lose. That's where I lose the fight immediately, because I don't want to start arguing in a meeting. And then I will take it offline, and then I'll go duke it out, and then we'll come back like at a different time later. That's how I've handled that. That's a way of doing it. I've seen people do it that way too. We'll figure out the best way and then move on from it. Have you had those kind of scenarios?
Yeah, especially around technology. There's a million different ways to write software, right? And many of those millions of ways are successful and equally performant, and may or may not be what you want to do.
And many aren't.
Many are not the way that I'm comfortable with, or have seen done ever, or have seen done successfully ever, right? I've seen a lot of people start down many roads and then get to the point where they're like, oh, let's rip it all out and do it the easy way.
Earlier because I know everybody in this room is capable of standing up in front of an audience and giving a presentation and not anxiety attacks and all of that stuff. But earlier in your career, did you ever find yourself in a situation where just in your presentation, you lost your train of thought, you didn't know how to get it back, and then you got the panicky feeling and then kind of froze up? Have you had that happen?
Boy, it's been a long time since I've been anywhere approaching that. Like, if somebody asked me to do a demo on something in 10 minutes, can you do a demo on this? I would feel comfortable doing it. I'd like to run through it at least one time. But if I don't have the chance, I'll do it, and we'll see what goes wrong and pick up the pieces as we go. 20 years ago, not a chance. Be like, no, I can do it maybe in 2 or 3 days after I've practiced and run through this before. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've had fear of giving a speech to my peers. I mean, high school speech class for me was daunting. 15 years later, giving a presentation to a room full of 20 people about why I feel this technology is the technology that you guys should be using and my company should be helping you use it with is a whole different thing. So, and I don't know what happened in the intervening years, but I'm glad it did, because I wouldn't want to be that anxious every single time. Being up there and just shaking uncontrollably would be really a lot tougher.
I would have some that would keep me up at night, but what I found is the better prepared I am ahead of time, if given the opportunity, the less anxious I am about it. And then I have to remind myself that I've done this 100 times, and the guy that has 100 of these under his belt is going to be the one giving that presentation tomorrow. He's gotten through all those, so get through this one. If I fumble a word, the desire for perfection, you got to kind of set those aside and just go do your thing and hope it works out. But planning and prep is definitely going to help. And then not relying on as few points of failure as possible, technical failures or otherwise. I think that's good. I think that's my parting thoughts is trust that you're who you've been, and you've been a successful presenter and demoer and all of those things, and successful at doing your job. So you've got all that you bring with you to the table that will carry you through even if something happens.
I do like it when you mention that. I've heard you mention that once or twice before, that this is the person that's done it 100 times. They're the one going to be giving the speech, not the person from high school, and just try to remember that. And I think a lot of us get to that point where we even forget the hundreds of times. We're just like, yeah, I'm just going to do it. Whatever happens, happens. So, but when things go south, preparation is probably the key recovery from that.
I would agree with that. I would say probably in the early days of my career, I would take on presentations, let's say, about things that I didn't know as well. I can do this. And whether I was trying to prove it to somebody else or prove it to myself that I could do it, right. I no longer do that. Like, I don't need to prove anything to myself. I'm only going to present on things I know well, or at least minimize my presentations on things that I don't. And I did one this summer. I did basically, it's not a presentation, but I had to speak in public on something that I had never done before. And my solution was, as you said, Kyle and Peter, preparation, run through the talk multiple times, feel comfortable with it, and then minimizing the potential problems.
I became a dungeon master, and I hadn't really done it. I did it once like a billion years ago. And I prepped a lot, and I still needed help. Luckily, Steve was there. So now we're talking about D&D, and
hold on. Yeah. Let's hear Chad's parting thoughts first.
I don't know. I just think, being prepared. If this is something that gives you like this existential dread, right? Like, hey, I'm going to give a presentation, and the only thing you can think about is failing. Do it anyway. Get through it. And do a lot of them, and you'll be fine. Do public like that, being the voice in the room, like there's a lot of benefits to doing that. Make all your mistakes early, and you'll get better. So if you're not used to doing it, it sucks for a couple of years. Unless you are a sociopath, it should feel uncomfortable. So get through that. And then as you've seen it happen, it will become, and honestly, maybe failing horribly a couple of times, probably the best motivator to make subsequent presentations, demos, whatever the hell you're doing, smoother, because you'll know that feeling and you'll work a little harder to avoid it. But yeah, just get through the first handful and don't worry about it.
I remember going through Toastmasters and having some of that experience and having those early speeches. So go through, do something that's inconsequential. It doesn't have to be the most important meeting of your life to start out as your first presentation. Have it be something a lot less important. Take on those demos. Offer to do the demos for your small group, during your Agile presentations. I think that's a great way to start.
We've been doing called SGG Presents now. We used to call it Communities of Practice, but giving people an opportunity to do a presentation for the people in the company. And then we do a big, why we've talked about that. We've done podcasts about it. But through that, having been doing it for so long, there's people that I mentor along the way. When you see the difference, it's amazing. It brings you so much joy to see how much that person has grown,
right,
and how much more polished they are. And yeah, it's just got a couple of people that are out there doing this stuff, and they do an amazing job. And they didn't when they started, and I didn't when I started.
And neither will you.
Steve, any parting thoughts?
No, just thank you for inviting me to the party.
Yeah, and thank you for being here on incredibly short notice without any prep.
That's right, no prep.
Steve, what lake are you in?
I'm sorry, what was that, Chad?
What lake is in the background?
That is a lake up in the Boundary Waters, where I was this last weekend for a very short but cold fishing trip.
Oh, okay.
So just outside of Ely.
Just outside of Ely.
Yep.
Nowhere near where we go in January for an even colder fishing trip.
Correct.
Okay.
Winter camping. All right. I think with that, we'll shut it down and say goodbye, everybody. Thanks for listening, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.